The dust from my son's car, a luxury vehicle I now realized I had paid for, was still settling on my black funeral dress. It formed a gritty, disrespectful film on my worn leather shoes. I stood alone on a deserted country road, a place with no name, the silence broken only by the lazy chirping of unseen insects in the tall, sun-scorched grass. The whine of his engine had faded completely, leaving a vacuum in its wake. My son, Julian, had just left me here. An hour ago, we were at his father's funeral, where he delivered a eulogy so filled with false sentiment it made my stomach turn. Now, he had driven me to this middle of nowhere, pulled over on the gravel shoulder, and turned to me. There was no anger in his eyes, no flicker of remorse. There was nothing, just a cold, flat emptiness that chilled me more than any rage could have. "This is where you get off, Mother," he had said, his voice as barren as the landscape around us. "The house and the business are mine now. Dad made sure of it in his final will. You're not needed anymore. I've arranged a small monthly payment for you, enough for a simple life. It's more than you deserve." He had watched, impassive, as I, his mother, got out of the car, clutching the small, worn handbag that contained nothing but a lace handkerchief and an old tube of lipstick. He didn't offer me money for a taxi. He didn't ask if I had my phone, knowing full well he had taken it from me earlier, under the pretense of charging it for me. He just put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving me in his rearview mirror without a single backward glance. He thought he had taken my home, my money, and my future. He thought he had reduced me to a helpless old woman. What he didn't know was that the woman he left standing in the dust wasn't a victim. She was a queen who had already checkmated the king. This act of breathtaking cruelty wasn't a sudden impulse. It was the final, ugly bloom of a seed of resentment that had been planted years ago. My late husband, George, and I had been a team in every sense of the word. We built George's Gourmet from a dream whispered over our small kitchen table into a nationally recognized brand. George was the sun, the charismatic face of it all. He could charm anyone, his laughter filling every room. But I was the gravity that held it all together. I was the one who spent sleepless nights perfecting the recipes, the one who navigated the cutthroat world of suppliers, the one who meticulously charted the company's financial course. He was the heart, I was the spine. We were invincible, together. But we had one profound weakness, a shared blind spot that would ultimately cost us so dearly. Our son. We raised Julian in a world of comfort and opportunity. We mistook his laziness for a contemplative nature, his shocking arrogance for a burgeoning confidence. Every failure was cushioned, every mistake excused. When he flunked out of business school, it was because the professors didn't appreciate his vision. When he crashed his first sports car, it was a valuable life lesson. We were fools. We weren't raising a son. We were cultivating a weed of pure entitlement in our own lovingly tended garden. When George was diagnosed with cancer, the change in Julian was insidious. He morphed into the very picture of a devoted son. He was a constant presence at George's bedside, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Don't you worry about a thing, Dad," I would hear him say. "You just focus on getting better. I'll protect your legacy. I'll make sure Mom doesn't have to worry about a thing." I wanted to believe it. My heart, already fractured with the impending loss of my husband, desperately wanted to see the good in my son. But then, the small, discordant notes began to sound. I'd walk into George's room and find a stack of complex legal documents on his nightstand, placed there by Julian, always conveniently after the nurse had administered a dose of morphine. I would find Julian guiding his father's weak, trembling hand to sign a paper, whispering, "It's just some routine paperwork. Dad helps with the taxes." I started being left out of emails from our corporate lawyers. When I confronted Julian, his smile was a placating, dismissive mask. "Mom, please. You have enough on your plate. You look exhausted. Why don't you let me handle the boring stuff? You should be spending this time with Dad, not stressing about legal jargon." He was using my love as a cage, my grief as a tool to sideline me from my own life. The moment the fog truly lifted, the moment I saw the monster wearing my son's face, was on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet. George was sleeping. I was walking past his study, the door slightly ajar, and I heard Julian's voice. It wasn't the soft, caring tone he used with us. It was sharp, excited, and dripping with a venomous ambition. "No, the old man is fading fast," he was saying to someone on the phone. "He signed the revised will yesterday." He barely knew what day it was. "It gives me sole control, a full power of attorney. The house, the business, all of it. My mother, she'll be taken care of, don't worry. I have a nice, quiet little plan to put her out to pasture once he's gone. She won't know what hit her." And then he laughed. It was a short, ugly bark of a laugh, the sound of pure, triumphant greed. I backed away from the door, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a cry. The floor seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. The air was thick, unbreathable. It wasn't just that he was taking over. It was the glee, the contempt. The phrase "put her out to pasture" echoed in my head. He saw me as livestock, an inconvenience, to be dealt with. The love I had for my son withered and died in that moment, replaced by something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. I would not be put out to pasture. I would not be a victim. I would burn his kingdom to the ground before I let him sit on a throne he had stolen from his dying father. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the betrayal a physical weight in my chest. The next morning, I made the most important call of my life. I called Howard, our oldest friend and the lawyer who had helped us incorporate the business 30 years ago. He was retired, but I knew he would answer. I sat in his dusty, book-lined office and told him everything. The rage that simmered in his old eyes was a comfort. "That ungrateful little viper," he seethed. "Eleanor, George is not of sound mind. That will he signed is worthless. We can contest it in court and win." "I know, Howard," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "But a court battle will drag George's name through the mud. It will be public, ugly, and it will give Julian exactly what he wants. A drama where he can play the misunderstood son. No, we are not going to challenge the will. We are going to make the will worthless." And so, we began our silent, secret war for the next 2 months, while Julian was playing the role of the devoted son. I was a ghost in my own company, orchestrating the greatest restructuring in its history. It was a heartbreaking process. It felt like I was meticulously dismantling the beautiful house George and I had built together. With Howard's legal mastery, I established a new parent company, a name I chose for its strength and anonymity, Northwood Provisions. Then, the real work began. We started a quiet, legal hemorrhage of assets from George's Gourmet, the secret recipes for our award-winning preserves, the ones passed down from my grandmother, transferred to a new vault under Northwood's ownership. The trademarks, the brand identity George and I had spent decades building, legally assigned to Northwood. Our multi-million-dollar contracts with national grocery chains and specialty food distributors, each one was quietly renegotiated and signed under the new corporate entity. I had to meet with suppliers we had known for decades, men who had bounced Julian on their knee and lied to their faces, telling them we were simply restructuring for tax purposes. Each lie was a small cut to my soul, but I knew it was necessary. The final, brutal stroke was the debt. I had the shell of George's gourmet take on substantial, legally binding loans, secured against the company's now hollowed-out assets. It was a poison pill of staggering proportions. I was turning Julian's coveted inheritance into a financial black hole. The last piece of the puzzle was the house, our home. The document that transferred the property from our joint trust to a new one, solely in my name, was the hardest to prepare. It felt like a final goodbye to the partnership that had defined my life. George was having a rare, lucid day. The morphine had worn off, and his eyes were clear, though tired. I sat by his bed, held his frail hand, and told him everything. I didn't spare him the details of Julian's cruelty. Tears streamed down his pale, sunken cheeks. He squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Protect what we built, he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Protect yourself. You were always the smart one. You were always the queen." He took the pen, and with a steady hand that defied his illness, he signed the document. It was his last gift to me. Not a treasure, but a sword and a shield. When George passed away a week later, I was shattered, but I was also ready. At his funeral, I watched my son deliver a eulogy filled with beautiful lies about his father's integrity and wisdom. He spoke of carrying on the family legacy, his voice thick with emotion. I was the only one in that church who knew he wasn't mourning a father. He was celebrating an acquisition. Which brings me back to this dusty, forgotten road. The sun is hot on my head. The silence is absolute. He thinks I am stranded, helpless, and alone. He is wrong on all counts. My initial shock, the visceral human reaction to such a monstrous betrayal, has subsided. It has been replaced by a cold, calm certainty. I reach into my handbag. My fingers close around the single object I made sure to bring. It's not a tube of lipstick. It's a simple, brass key. It is the key to a small, clean, furnished apartment in a town 50 miles from here, an apartment I rented and paid for, in cash, for the next 6 months. It is the key to my command center, my new life. My son thought he was leaving me with nothing, but in his arrogance, he gave me the one thing I now cherish above all else, my freedom. Freedom from his greed, from his lies, from the suffocating weight of his entitlement. He thinks the game is over. He doesn't understand. My turn is just beginning. I square my shoulders, turn my back on the road he came from, and I start to walk. I have a long way to go, but for the first time in a very long time, I am walking towards a future that is entirely my own. The walk was long, but my mind was clear. Each step on that gravel road was a deliberate act of shedding the past. With each crunch of stone beneath my sensible shoes, I shed the skin of Eleanor, the grieving wife, Eleanor, the trusting mother. The sun beat down, but I didn't feel its heat. I was fueled by a cold fire from within, a resolve forged in the crucible of the ultimate betrayal. I walked for nearly an hour, a solitary figure in a black dress against a sprawling, indifferent landscape. I wasn't just walking away from the spot where my son had abandoned me. I was walking away from the woman I had been, the woman who made excuses, who loved so blindly that she couldn't see the viper she had raised. Just as I rounded a long bend, a discreet black sedan pulled over 100 yards ahead. It waited, its engine idling softly. It was exactly as Howard had arranged. The driver, a professional and silent man, got out and opened the rear door for me without a word. He had been paid in cash weeks ago for this one task, to be on this specific road, at this specific time. As I settled into the cool leather of the back seat, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Julian, in his monumental arrogance, had assumed I was helpless. He never imagined that his act of abandonment was, in fact, the final, necessary step in my own meticulously crafted plan. The drive to the town of Northwood was silent. I watched the dry fields give way to small, tidy towns. An hour later, we pulled up to a modest, clean apartment building on a quiet, tree-lined street. The driver handed me a small envelope containing a key and a brand new, unregistered burner phone, then drove away. I was truly alone now, but it was a solitude of strength, not of despair. The apartment was on the second floor. It was simple, furnished with practical, anonymous pieces. It had a small kitchen, a firm bed, and a large window that overlooked a small park. It was a blank slate. It was my command center. An hour later, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Howard, my lawyer, his face a mixture of concern and fierce pride. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of respect, "you look like a woman on a mission." "I am, Howard," I replied, leading him to the small dining table. "Did it work?" He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of documents. "Like a Swiss watch," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips. "The final transfer of the house into the Vance Trust was recorded this morning. The restructuring of the corporate assets is complete and airtight. As of 9 a.m. today, George's Gourmet officially possesses a grand total of $5,000 in its operating account, a warehouse full of perishable goods with no distributors, and approximately $2.5 million in legally binding corporate debt. Congratulations, Eleanor. You are now the proud owner of a thriving, debt-free national food brand, and your son is the CEO of a bankrupt ghost." He handed me the burner phone. "This is your new line. Only he and I have the number. The laptop is secure. Your new life begins now." While I was settling into my new fortress of solitude, Julian was claiming his throne. He strode into the headquarters of George's Gourmet like a returning king. He had spent the morning at the bank with the copy of his father's fraudulent will, legally establishing himself as the sole director. He admired his father's name on the wall, then walked into his father's office and sat in his large leather chair, swiveling slowly to take in the view. It was all his. His first act was to call a company-wide meeting. He stood before the employees, many of whom had worked for us for decades, and delivered a speech full of slick corporate jargon about a new era of dynamic growth and streamlining for a more aggressive market position. Then the axe fell. He fired Sarah, our head of product development for 20 years, the woman who had helped me perfect every recipe. He fired Robert, our head of logistics, a man so loyal he once drove a truck full of our products through a snowstorm himself to make a delivery deadline. He fired anyone he saw as his mother's people. In their place, he promoted his own unqualified friends, young men with expensive suits and greedy eyes. The atmosphere in the building shifted from one of grief to one of fear and confusion. His victory tour continued. He drove his new sports car to the bank to begin the process of liquidating what he thought was a multi-million-dollar account. He sat, smugly, across from the bank manager. "I'll be transferring the bulk of the company's capital to a new investment account I've established," he announced. The manager looked at his screen, his brow furrowed. "Well, Mr. Vance," he said slowly, "the capital in this account is minimal. There was a series of large transfers made over the past 2 months for asset restructuring. The current balance is just over $5,000. Julian's smile froze. "What? That's impossible. My mother must have mismanaged the cash flow." "It's fine. The revenue streams are enormous. It will replenish in no time." But the revenue streams were gone. The first call came that afternoon. It was from our most important supplier, a beekeeper in Tasmania who provided the rare, organic leatherwood honey that was the signature ingredient in our best-selling product. "Julian," the man's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "I'm calling about the outstanding invoice for the last shipment." Yes, it'll be paid," Julian said dismissively. "Now, about our next order. I want to double it." There was a pause. "I'm afraid there won't be a next order, son," the beekeeper said, his voice turning cold. "As of last week, my exclusive supply contract was legally reassigned. My honey now belongs to a company called Northwood Provisions. Furthermore, your company, George's Gourmet, is in default on a $200,000 loan we provided. For that shipment, payment is due immediately." Julian was stunned into silence. "Northwood Provisions? I've never heard of them." "Well, you might want to look into them," the man said, "because it seems they own your entire supply chain now." Before Julian could respond, his secretary buzzed in. "Mr. Vance, it's John from Global Grocers Online too. He says it's urgent." Global Grocers was our biggest national distributor, the key to our presence in thousands of stores. Julian stabbed at the button. "John? Just the man I wanted to talk to. I'm taking over. We're going to do big things." "Actually, Julian," the voice on the other end said grimly, "I'm calling to terminate our contract. I just received a legal notice. Our distribution agreement, along with exclusive rights to all George's Gourmet branded products, has been transferred to a new entity, Northwood Provisions. We'll be pulling all of your old stock from our shelves by the end of the week." The calls kept coming, an avalanche of disaster. The trucking company, the jar manufacturer, the label printer, each one told the same story. Their contracts had been reassigned. They were now working for a company called Northwood Provisions. Panic began to set in. His newly promoted friends were useless, offering no solutions, their faces pale with fear. The office, which had been buzzing with the energy of his triumphant takeover that morning, was now as quiet as a tomb. Julian, now in a full-blown rage, stormed back to his father's office. He began tearing through file cabinets, searching for any mention of this mysterious company that had stolen his empire from under his nose. He found nothing. All he found were bills, piles and piles of them, demands for payment, default notices. The shell company he had inherited was not just empty, it was a black hole of debt. He grabbed his phone to call me, to scream, to demand an explanation. The number was disconnected. He tried my old cell phone, the one he had in his pocket. He plugged it in. The battery was dead. He was completely cut off. He was alone in the office late that night, the weight of his catastrophic failure crashing down on him. His lawyer called. "Julian, it's worse than we thought," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "I was doing a title search on your father's house. just as a formality for the estate. There's a problem. A major problem. The property was transferred out of your father's trust 6 weeks ago. It was moved into a new, private trust. The Vance Trust. Julian, you don't own the house. You never did. According to this, you are illegally occupying the property. At that exact moment, as the world dissolved into a nightmare around him, his computer chimed with a new email. It was a mass email, a press release sent out to every major player in the gourmet food industry. The subject line read, announcing the official launch of Northwood Provisions. He clicked it. Open, his hands trembling. The email detailed the acquisition of all assets, recipes, and contracts formerly associated with the George's Gourmet brand. It spoke of a new era of quality and integrity, honoring the true legacy of its original founders. It was signed by the company's president and chief executive officer, and at the bottom of the page, in a clean, elegant font, was the signature that finally and completely shattered his world. Eleanor Vance. He stared at the name, his mother's maiden name, a name he hadn't heard in years, and the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't been abandoned. She hadn't been erased. She had done the erasing, and he had been the fool all along. The name on the screen burned into Julian's retinas. Eleanor Vance. It was a ghost from a past he had never bothered to learn, a name he had only seen on old, dusty documents. His mother's maiden name. It was a declaration of war from a woman he had written off as a casualty. The world didn't just shatter around him. It inverted, revealing that he had never been the player, only a pawn in a game he hadn't even known was being played. The rage came first, a hot, blinding wave of it. He swept the expensive crystal paperweight from his father's desk, and it crashed against the wall, leaving a spiderweb of cracks in the plaster. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure, thwarted entitlement. He was a king standing in the ruins of a kingdom that had never truly been his. His panic sent him scrambling into the night. He drove recklessly to the house, the home he had proudly occupied for mere days. He fumbled with his key, but it wouldn't turn. The locks had been changed. He banged his fist against the heavy oak door, shouting her name. Mother, mother, I know you're in there. Open this door. But the only answer was the echo of his own voice in the silent, manicured cul-de-sac. Neighbors' lights began to flick on, curtains twitching. The new king was a madman, locked out of his own castle. For the next 3 days, he descended into a frantic, desperate hunt. He called her old cell phone number dozens of times, only to be met with the flat, impersonal tone of a disconnected line. He drove to the homes of her friends, her distant cousins, anyone from her address book. They all met him with the same polite, blank confusion. Eleanor. No, we haven't seen her in weeks. We assumed she was with you, dear. They were not lying. I had made sure my plan was a tight circle of 2. Myself and Howard. Julian was chasing a ghost. Meanwhile, his hollow empire was imploding. The for sale sign on the lawn of the house was replaced with a stark, legal notice of disputed ownership. The company's bank accounts were frozen due to the massive debts I had secured against them. The employees he had hired quit, seeing the writing on the wall. The friends he had promoted stopped answering his calls. In the space of 72 hours, he went from a triumphant CEO to a pariah, trapped in his father's office with nothing but ringing phones from angry creditors. From my quiet apartment, my command center, I watched the fallout with a calm, detached sorrow. Howard provided daily updates. He's unraveling, Eleanor, he'd say. He's making threats. He's trying to hire his own lawyers, but no one will take his case once they see the state of the company's finances. I let him stew in the chaos he had created for a full week. I let him experience the terror of complete and utter powerlessness. I let him feel what it was like to be me on that dusty road. Then, and only then, did I make my move. I had Howard call his lawyer. A meeting was proposed. My terms were simple and non-negotiable. It would take place at Howard's downtown office. Julian would come alone. There would be no negotiations, only a final statement. He arrived looking like a man who had been through a war. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was unkempt, and there were dark, desperate circles under his eyes. He wasn't the confident predator I had last seen. He was a cornered animal. He walked into the conference room and saw me sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, Howard by my side. I was no longer in a black funeral dress. I was wearing a sharp, cream-colored business suit. I was not a grieving mother. I was the CEO of Northwood Provisions. The rage returned to his eyes, a final, sputtering flame. "You," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How could you do this? You stole my company. You stole my inheritance." I let the accusation hang in the air for a moment before I answered, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. "No, Julian," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "I did not steal your company. I saved our company from you. The company your father and I built was about quality, integrity, and family. You tried to turn it into your personal piggy bank, so I performed a surgery. I carefully extracted the soul of the business, the recipes, the contracts, the assets, and moved it to a safe place. I left you exactly what you seemed to value most, a hollow name and an empty chair. You tricked Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You took advantage of a sick man." "Did I?" I countered, my voice dangerously soft. "Or did you? I have the security footage from your father's room, Julian. The footage of you guiding his hand to sign a will he was too medicated to read. I have the testimony of his nurses. Your father, in his last clear moments, co-signed every document that saved this company. He did it with a clear mind and a broken heart. He saw who you had become, and he helped me protect his true legacy from his own son." He sank into a chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic desperation. But the money, my inheritance." "Your inheritance?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your inheritance was a lifetime of unconditional love. It was every advantage, every opportunity, every second chance we gave you. It was the trust of a father who, even on his deathbed, hoped you would become a better man. You took that inheritance, Julian, and you burned it to the ground for a quick profit. This," and Howard slid a thick folder across the table. "This is what's left. A company with millions in debt. A list of creditors who will pursue you for the rest of your life. That is the inheritance you have earned for yourself." He stared at the folder, the reality of his ruin finally, completely, sinking in. He began to cry, not the tears of remorse, but the ugly, gulping sobs of a spoiled child who has had his favorite toy taken away. "What am I supposed to do?" he whimpered. "Please, Mom, help me." I looked at my son, this stranger with a familiar face, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty sadness. The love was gone, scoured away by his betrayal. "I cannot help you, Julian," I said, my voice final, "but I will not see you on the street. That is not who I am." I had Howard slide a second, smaller envelope across the table. This contains a cashier's check for $50,000. It is not a gift. It is a severance package. It is enough for you to get a small apartment and start over, far away from here. In return, you will sign this document, relinquishing any and all future claims to my estate, my business, or my life. You will take this money, and you will disappear. You will no longer be my son, and I will no longer be your mother. We will be strangers. That is the only deal on the table. He looked from the check to my face, searching for a flicker of weakness, a hint of the mother he had so easily manipulated. He found none. With a trembling hand, he took the pen and signed his own exile. He took the check and walked out of the room, out of my life, without looking back. A year has passed. Northwood Provisions is more than just successful. It is thriving. I rehired Sarah and Robert and all the other loyal employees Julian had cast aside. We work together, not as a corporation, but as a family, a real one. Our test kitchen is my favorite place on earth, a place filled with the smell of cinnamon and vanilla and the sound of laughter. We are creating new things, but we are doing it on the old foundation of quality, integrity, and love. The business is a joy again. I hear whispers about Julian sometimes. A cousin mentioned he saw him working as a waiter in a city hundreds of miles away. The $50,000, I'm told, was gone in a matter of months, squandered on a foolish attempt to reclaim his old lifestyle. The friends he had promoted, the ones who were supposed to be his new inner circle, they abandoned him the moment the money dried up. He is truly alone now, a fate he so cruelly tried to inflict upon me. I take no joy in his downfall. I only feel a profound sense of waste for the boy he once was, and the man he refused to become. My home is quiet again, but it is a peaceful quiet. It is filled with the warmth of my own company. I have reconnected with old friends. I travel. I read. I have found a rhythm to my life that is entirely my own. I am not just a widow. I am not just a mother. I am Eleanor, and that is enough. The key I clutched in my hand on that dusty road no longer opens the door to a temporary safe house. It has unlocked the door to the rest of my life. My son thought my story was over. He didn't realize he was just a chapter, and that I was the one holding the pen. He thought he was closing the book, but all he did was force me to start writing a much better one.